Welcome everybody to our faculty talk today with Laurel Sparks, the first of our public programs here at the Leslie MFA June 2021 residency. I'm the director of the program, Ben Sloat, and we start our program with a land acknowledgement. Lesley University here in Cambridge resides on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Massachusetts people, whose name was appropriated by this Commonwealth. We pay respect to the Massachusetts peoples and their neighbors, the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples, who have stewarded this land for generations. And we offer our appreciation to the lands and waters for sustaining us. Our general thematic for this residency is repatterning, which considers the way gestures, personal behaviors, cultural aesthetics, and larger social systems are being reevaluated and restructured as we look towards a post-COVID world. Our programs continue tomorrow with a talk by visiting faculty, curator and writer Evan Garza, Tuesday by the participatory installation artist Li Ming Wei, Wednesday with curator and mixed media painter Michelle Grabner, and Thursday with curator Denise Markonish. I hope those watching the YouTube live stream on the front page of our website can join us for those programs. Today's program is a faculty talk with MFA faculty Laurel Sparks and is titled Dream Machines. Sparks' abstract paintings come from an alchemical practice combining esoteric language, sacred geometry, and theatrical artifice. As stated in a review of her work in the Brooklyn Rail, for Sparks, painting is simultaneously a belief system in a way to create icons that put the viewer into contact with an occult power. On the other hand, there's a magic of sensuous seduction. The works are simply beautiful and express only their own aesthetic delight. Laurel's work has been shown at Cheim and Reed, New York, Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, D'Amelio Terras, New York, deCordova Museum, Massachusetts, the Tang Teaching Museum, Saratoga Springs, and the Leslie-Lohman Gallery, a Museum of Gay and Lesbian Art. She is represented by Werble Gallery in New York. And please join me in welcoming Laurel Sparks.
All right, I just unmuted myself and I'm working from two monitors for the first time ever. So hopefully this will go smoothly. I just want to thank everybody for joining me for this talk today. And I just want to wish everybody a happy belated Juneteenth from yesterday, a happy summer solstice, which is today, and happy Father's Day. So we'll just begin with those acknowledgements. And Ben, thank you for the land acknowledgement. I'm actually in Lenape territory in upstate New York, Lenape and Mohawk territory here in Rhinebeck. I'm going to start with discussing a few projects that I've been working on since right before the pandemic up to the present, and show how months of quarantine have impacted my practice. So I'm not going to be showing my whole herb of work. I'm really only focused on what's happened in the last less than 2 years. I'm going to mostly show paintings, but with the current residency theme of repatterning in mind, I wanted to set the stage with a video of Irish writer and theater director Samuel Beckett's performance titled Quad that was originally broadcast on television in Germany in 1981. There we go. It's gonna take us to YouTube, and I'll show a couple minutes of this, maybe 3 minutes. I was told that no sound was playing for that. Is that true? Anyway, I'll just go on from here. Just to describe what I was showing. Beckett referred to this quad performance as a geometrical mime, which grew out of his long-time goal of achieving an entirely new means of expression through the elimination of language. This performance is based on a geometrical figure and on permutations of regular movements by 4 figures. The figures are all accompanied by a distinct percussion and unisex colored robes, colored red, blue, yellow, and white. The sequence includes 4 series of 6 stages, which produce a total of 24 stages, suggesting the measurement of time, such as 24 hours to the day. The characters are alike in their size and their movement pattern, but they're distinct in their color, their footsteps, and their sound accompaniment, which you may or may not have heard. I hope you did, and if you don't, this is on YouTube, so I recommend everybody watch the whole performance if it's of interest to you. So combined, Beckett allows measured systems to commingle with chant. The mathematical, chromatic, and philosophical framework of this piece relates directly to my own approach to patterns. This is a portrait of Beat era American artist Harry Smith, and he's flanked by images of his string figures, which most of you will recognize as the practice of cat's cradle. I'm attracted to string figures as a universal method developed by pre-literate cultures to tell stories across the world. Like Beckett's performance, string figures also function as a non-linguistic expression. In her book, Staying with the Trouble, Donna Haraway discusses string figures as, quote, thinking as well as making practices. Haraway writes that some Navajo thinkers describe string games as a kind of patterning for restoring harmony, beauty, order, and the right relations in the world. This idea relates to the practice of sympathetic magic, where esoteric magicians use ceremonial tools as microcosms for working with aspects of the external macrocosmic world. Some of you may recognize this glyph as a Kabbalistic tree of life. It is foundational to esoteric philosophies that make up Western mystery traditions, specifically Hermeticism. These traditions have origins in ancient Egyptian, Greek, and Hebrew cultures, and were later codified in the Middle Ages and Western Renaissance. This particular image is from the 19th century secret society, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and shows what's categorized as the Queen's color scale, which is a palette I adapt frequently to my work. The Kabbalistic tree of life glyph includes 10 points, 22 paths that demonstrate an exchange of polarities towards equilibrium. Each sphere or path has corresponding colors, as well as names, numeric values, geometric figures, sonic vibrations, archetypes, planets, elements, and zodiacal aspects. Very complex. I noticed the relationship, though, between the 10 fingers that generate string figures and the 10 spheres that connect multiple pathways on the tree. As an invisible reference, this glyph serves as an engine for much of the patterning and symbolism in my work. This is a 1964 drawing by American artist Lenore Tawney of ink lines on graph paper, and it's titled The Union of Fire and Water 2. It's a hexagram made by overlapping the esoteric sigils for fire, which is the red triangle, and water, which is the blue downward pointed triangle. In alchemy, this 6-pointed star is referred to as the Seal of Solomon, or a symbol of what's called the chemical wedding. And it's an encrypted geometrical shape that's in my series Dream Machine. So I pulled this quote from the introduction of Ursula K. Le Guin's 1969 science fiction novel, Left Hand of Darkness. As Pythagoras knew, the god may speak in the forms of geometry as well as in the shapes of dreams, in the harmony of pure thought, as well as in the harmony of sound, in numbers as well as in words. So the diagram on the left shows another pattern-based system that emerged in 12th century France. It's a complex mathematical poetry system called the Sistina, which consists of 6 stanzas with 6 lines each. The end words of the first stanza are repeated in a different numerical order as the end words in each of the subsequent 5 stanzas. The diagram here on the left shows that if you draw a spiral from the bottom number, you arrive at the next number sequence. So what would happen here, if I can get my cursor to work, is that this would 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 would go to 6, 1, 5, 2, 4, 3. So that's this sequence. And then if you draw a spiral from 3, it goes 3, 6, 4, 1, 2, 5. And that generates the next numerical sequence, and so on through the 6 stanzas. So in the spirit of generating a language without words, I overlaid these 6 numerical patterns over 6 hexagrams to generate a form of string figures. So here's a page from my sketchbook. And the points on the hexagram corresponds with the first 6 colored spheres on the tree of life. And coincidentally, the colors of Beckett's quad performance, thinking of the kind of black platform square as being, the black color, and then obviously the primary colors and white are present in their robes. So here, each string figure represents a poetry stanza, and the color of the string figure is determined by its point of origin on the hexagram. So here, that would start at white and make this lightning bolt shape, or this one, second stanza, starts at yellow and ends at black. There we go. So the Sistina experiment is part of an ongoing collaboration I've had with this Kansas City-based sound artist, Sean Hansen, who composed corresponding sound pieces to my visual translations, which will be included in an exhibition in the winter of 2022. So stay tuned on that. But I'm going to be only talking about my paintings for this talk, but that will be something coming up in the future and is in the works. So here is one of two pages from my sketchbook. This is where my ideas evolve over time before they become projects. I spend months developing systems and adaptations of them in these books before I actually start a series of work. These images I'm showing are studies for weaving, where the Sistina stanza numbers are translated into grid numbers. So on the left is black, which is stanza 3, and it takes up 3 grid squares. And on the right, it's yellow, which is stanza 2, and takes up 2 grid squares, so that the numerical values are embedded in these kind of weaving patterns. And then the color of the hexagram spheres are now invisible. The ones that you saw in the last sketch, I've made the spheres invisible, and now there's these color points that get activated as I'm moving through the string figure clockwise. So as I cross a colored string, that turns that shape, whatever that color is. And then the starting color, like say black or yellow, is carried throughout as each section shifts from color to color clockwise. I approach my work the way Donna Haraway frames string figures. It's a form of thinking as well as making. Instead of knowing what I'm doing, my studio practice is an opportunity to study and engage with complex systems that relate to ancient and persistent ontological worldviews. So during the summer before COVID, that was summer 2019, I had a MacDowell Artist Fellowship in New Hampshire, where I realized the Sistina diagrams as these hand-woven pattern paintings. And here is a studio shot showing the drawings and paintings in process. I also make objects. So on the floor, you can see there a bunch of small paper pulp objects that I work on. And those are kind of a secret practice that I don't show very often. So part of the paintings are made lying flat on the floor or on the table. And this is so that I can pool white gesso in these pattern shapes of the woven raw canvas strips. So all of those white areas that you see on the floor and on the table paintings, those are sort of pooled poured gesso shapes. And here you can see that I'm cutting up canvas strips and then I'm coiling them into these small coils, then dipping them in either red or blue to make a rhythmic print on the pattern on the canvas, or a rhythmic print pattern on the canvas on the floor here. And then I'm kind of thinking of this floor canvas as a recording device that accumulates marks and stains and residue of activity. The canvas is ritually charged before it becomes the next painting, and it has a lineage of traces from the previous work. And I'm thinking of this process as an evolutionary performance. So I make drawings first to refine my systems, and this is 23 by 23 inches on paper. In weaving traditions, the scores for the tapestries are called cartoons, and that's what I call my drawings. I refer to them as cartoons as a gesture towards that lineage of tapestry weaving and preliminary drawing. I'm very interested in glitches and flaws and imperfections within organized systems. So after I complete a composition, I scrape the material to contaminate the borders and rupture the measured stability of the geometry. And I use a range of drawing materials and textures for their different elemental properties. So here I'm working with graphite, crayon, marker, and pastels, and then they're sort of scraped to blur and contaminate the borders. So I titled this particular series Dream Machines, although I kind of think of all of my work of the moment, especially the woven work, as dream machines. I kind of call them all that, but this particular series is titled that, and it's based on an experimental device that was made by another Beat era artist by the name of Brian Geisen. Here on the left is artist Brian Geisen with writer William Burroughs on the right, and they are in front of Geisen's Dream Machine. The Dream Machine is a flicker device designed as an art object to be viewed with closed eyes. And by closing your eyes in front of these flickering lights, it's intended to induce internal vision. And this is very similar to what Annie Besant and Charles Ledbetter were working with they were theosophists who were working with when they did their thought form experiments, which is a publication out there of visionary images that happen through closed eyes. And that was an experiment from the early 20th century. So everything that I'm going to show from this point forward has a full piece that's on the left and an image detail that's on the right, so that you can see the material nuances in the work. So I titled this series of paintings Dream Machine in homage to Geisen, but also because of the shifting patterns that have a vibrational quality. These are all 48 by 48 inches. I discovered the Beckett quad performance at the same time as I was making this series at MacDowell. And I was struck by the parallel intention of my work and that performance, in addition to the shared color palette, the pattern, and the square format. So I titled each of the 6 Dream Machines Quad 1 through 6. This one is Quad 1. It's a translation of the first stanza into a woven painting. It's a single grid, and it starts at the white point, ends at the yellow. And then I filled this remaining shape at the yellow point with paper pulp. So it has a dense relief. And the main color, which is the white path, is just raw canvas that courses through the whole painting. And then you can see up in some of these sections, stains of residue from a previous painting. This is Quad 2. It starts at the yellow point and ends at the black point. And so I've made at this point a black paper pulp shape. So that's sort of, as you can see in the detail on the right, you can see that it's kind of sculptural and kind of rugged in its texture. And when I'm making these, I'm attaching string to pins at each of these points, and then I remove it at the end after I've poured and painted. So I'm literally working with string figures. This one is the Black Path, stanza 3. And something that happens when I work is I change the systems as they evolve. I come up with sort of new approaches to the patterns that I'm working on. And here, what I did was stop making the pulp shapes at the end. And I started including the red and blue print canvas coils that are in the sort of underpainting of all of these. And that's this idea of like static noise, or sort of a drone that's happening under a kind of chaotic drone, I guess, and randomness that's happening underneath a more kind of measured rhythm. So there's kind of a musicality to them in my mind as I'm making them. So this is an install shot of a June 2020 exhibition titled Lost and Proud, excuse me, that was at the Thornwillow Gallery in upstate New York. It was a show of 4 contemporary artists that are working with weaving and textile as an homage to the legacy of fiber artist Lenore Tawney, whose drawing of the water and fire triangles I showed you earlier. So, this show was actually an homage to her work. This is the Red Path, the 4th stanza. As you could see in the aerial studio shot, every other section is made of raw canvas or a pool of white gesso, so that the underpainted areas of gesso are brighter and they optically vibrate next to the more muted stained raw section. So you can really see that in this detail, the sort of bright underpainted ones in the more kind of raw stained sections. This is Quad 5, the blue stanza. I'm applying paint by scrubbing stains of color into the raw canvas fiber and or glazing it over the white surfaces. And I'm working with beat up short bristle brushes The detail here shows the irregularities and the stains and the shifting rhythms of the canvas weaving. And I often describe the interaction of the measured system with the torn stained elements as feral geometry. This is quad 6, the last of the series, the gray string figure. And this detail shows that the grays in the corners of this painting are actually metallic silver. They're very sort of bright metallic silver. And it's not so easy to see in the larger image. So there's a lot of irregular finishes that are happening in my work, some shiny, some sparkly, some matte, etc. And so the next project that I did after this series is a translation of the Dream Machines into a 50-foot wall painting. So here's a little sketchbook moment. This project was at the Knockdown Center in Brooklyn. I had very short notice to design a 52 by 15 foot wall painting. I wasn't going to work with any other materials except for house paint. So I decided to string together the 6 panels from the Dream Machine series into a panorama. And at first I was thinking of, like in this sketch, of working with stripes at different angles. And all I did was make this quick thumbnail sketch. And then I went straight there and translated it to this. So once I got to the site, I abandoned the original design and I reverted back to the weaving pattern that I used in the paintings I just showed. Here you can see, so there's the painting compositions and then there's this inner frame, kind of like a marquee that goes around the compositions. And the colors in that correspond with the path color, but also each of these panels corresponds with either a fire or water element based on where they land in the hexagram. So this alternates the color of the stanza, white with the elements. So that's red in this one, and then over here you'll see yellow and blue, and so on. So that's what that marquee, as I call it, the colors that were determined by the system there. And then here's an angle. This is from the other side. So we're sort of ending on 6 here, and you can see the sections get longer to signify sort of six sections of a weaving versus the single ones that happen in the white path. And so the outer frame, which I can't call a marquee because it doesn't really light up, that alternates matte and gloss blacks. And so what I'm thinking of this outer layer is as a dark matter vessel that's containing a light spectrum. And here's a detail shot to show that new compositions were forming by joining these compositions together. And the way I made this mural, or I call it a wall painting, is by snapping chalk lines just for the string figure glyph, and then everything else is painted freehand, so that the irregularities of the free-handed painting mimic the weaving and the textile origins of these pieces. And then in here, these sections here that are a slightly different color, those are actually gold glitter. And those are areas that I call glitches. They're areas where the same color meets and creates a reaction, because I don't want the same color to meet at intersections. And so those areas I call a novelty or glitches, and that's where the gold glitter got placed in. So these kind of have this wall painting has a kind of vibration to it when you look at it, because I'm alternating gloss versus matte, deep versus pale, warm versus cool variations of a color, And so, you know, it's kind of constantly in motion, and doesn't have really predictable sequences to it. This is my largest work to date, and it was swiftly closed to the public after blood, sweat, and tears of making it in the course of a month. But the quarantine actually happened about a week after I completed it. So the good news is, the painting is now reopened for the summer at Knockdown Center because they weren't able to continue with their programming. So it is, if anybody's in Brooklyn and wants to go to the Knockdown Center to see it, it's open to the public. So after this, I gave up my Brooklyn studio and I moved upstate. I still have my place in Brooklyn, just not my studio. My home is there also. But I've been upstate during quarantine, where my wife, Hannah, has allowed me to work in half of her basement studio space, where I'm continuing to work to this day, while I'm waiting to build a larger studio and going through a very long, arduous zoning process to do that. So I'm still in my makeshift space. And so now I'm going to move on to what I'm doing, what I've been doing since quarantine. This quote is from British anthropologist Tim Ingold's 2020 book, Correspondences. I'm going to read it to you. First, every correspondence is a process. It carries on. Secondly, correspondence is open-ended. It aims for no fixed destination or final conclusion. For everything that might be said or done invites a follow-on. Thirdly, correspondences are dialogical. They're not solitary, but go on between and among participants. It is from these dialogical engagements that knowledge continually arises. To correspond is to be ever present at the cusp where thinking is on the point of settling into the shapes of thought. By working with correspondences, my systems continuously give way to unpredictable results and produce new potentialities. I am always adapting and adding new variables towards a visual evolution and new knowledge. I'm compelled by the way systems allow me to unravel conditioned biases and tendencies, as well as preconceptions of what art should look like. By following systems to points of rupture, I'm presented with opportunities for spontaneous or rogue gestures. Correspondences are not about looking for answers, but finding rabbit holes that lead to new discoveries. So previous to the quad series, I was working with magic squares and decided to create a correspondence between the Sistina system and the Order of Six magic square. Cornelius Agrippa was a German humanist during the Middle Ages who wrote manuscripts on esoteric philosophy, magic, and Hermetic Kabbalah. These manuscripts included correspondences between magic squares and the 7 classical planets from antiquity. The Order of Six magic square corresponds with the sun, as the sun is assigned the 6th sphere in the Hermetic tree of life. So each row of this column of the magic square contains 6 numbers. The square contains 36 numbers total, ranging from 1 to 36. Each row and column and diagonal adds up to 111. And all of the numbers in the square add up to 666. So here's my sketchbook. And what I do is I reduce all of these numbers to the single value of 1 through 9 and assign them a color from the queen scale of the tree of life. So for instance, all these yellow reduced to 6 and are assigned the yellow sphere from the tree. All the greens reduced to 7 and are assigned green. Green corresponds with the number 7 on the tree. I won't get too into the math. I know that it can be kind of overwhelming. So now I'm going to show you this series. This is the white path overlaid on the solar magic square. These pieces are 18 by 18 inches, so they're small tabletop size paintings. And I'm only using the colors for the squares with the values 1 through 6, which is the same palette as the quads and the same palette as the Beckett performance. The rest of it is raw canvas. The frame is made of paper pulp, and I introduced pennies as this metal element, and it also symbolizes a type of offering. And in the holes between the weaves is this kind of shiny gold material that you can kind of see right here. And that's a reference to alchemy, sort of exalted metal. This one is the yellow path, and I'm alternating again with poured gesso shapes and raw canvas. The outer frame is made of pulp, and some of the color activation happens sort of over the edges outside of the square here. This one's the black path. And the collaged triangles on the edge correlate with the color path. And then you can see the blue foil holes, and that corresponds with the water element that's assigned to this path. This one's the red path. You can see in some of the areas that there's glitter moments, kind of translucent glitter moments, so refracting light. All of this is done in my current makeshift studio. There's a humility of scale and a limited workspace that right now has felt really appropriate given our global health crisis and the political conflicts. And it's been an opportunity for me to find new pathways in my work and also do intense internal reflection. So this year has been hermetic literally for me, as it has been for a lot of us. The magic square is a perfectly balanced structure, while the Sistina is activating disparate expressions within it. The materials are introducing irregularities and interactive differences. I have a huge collection of small colored trinkets that I keep in colorized drawers, and I embed them in my work frequently, so that these blue wooden trinkets are embedded around the edge, and you can see the pink metallic sort of foil in the holes that's assigned the fire element for this piece. This is the final piece in the series of 6. It's the gray path. And so I'm working with these straightforward techniques that I associate with practice outside of professionalized art, such as weaving and decorative crafts or quilting. I was scolded in graduate school by a professor who said that if I wanted to be a painter, I must realize I have Caravaggio on my shoulders. And I knew then, as I do now, that my work had little to do with any so-called old master lineage, with all due respect. But that instead my work pays homage to artists who heal through abstraction, like Emma Kuntz or the G's Ben Collective, Hilma Offplant, Emery Blagden, to name a few. The paintings are more like talismanic objects. And my artist colleague, Rico Gasson, once referred to this as a way of working as making paint things, which is the title of and subject of our visiting faculty, Evan Garza's co-curated exhibition a few years back at the deCordova. So that's a fun coincidence. So this next series is an extension of a larger series called Sigils, which I started in 2011. The modern sigil process is starting with a written intention, translating that into a elemental glyph or some sort of a diagrammatic glyph, geometric glyph that's using an esoteric text formula. So it's meant to sort of be a secret symbol. So these text formulas in my work have directional, elemental, and color correspondences, like all the rest of my work. And in these pieces, the text is converted into a glyph and then locked into a woven pattern. So this is the first of 5 from this series. They're based on the sort of 5 cardinal elements. So there's 5 of them. They're all 18 by 24 inches, so they're small. I'm still thinking about string figures. This detail on the right will show the holes are filled with metallic colors that correspond with the cardinal elements. And then on the edges, you see some color shifting on the edges, and those have correspondence with the compass and those directions. And then I set up rules as I'm making these, that anything that is not enclosed by the letters becomes solid. So the yellow triangle up at the top is paper pulp with holes that are stuffed with objects. And then the right triangle is ash that's mixed with polymer medium. So I burn wood and then sift the ash and then make paint out of it. So I'm thinking of combining the elemental colors, in this case it's red, with the flashing after image colors that you see when you close your eyes. So this, here we have red and its flashing color is green, which is the complementary color. And this one is this is what, West, it's a lunar theme, and it's made with like a black enamel, silver paper pulp relief, and also ash. All of these paintings have these sections of paper pulp relief. So there's relief here, and you can also see that there's sections of iridescent glitter along the edges and foil happening in the holes there. And so the weaving and the shifting patterns act as a form of dazzle camouflage that simultaneously encrypts and reveals the internal structure. The eye is meant to keep moving so that hierarchies are constantly interrupted. There's a constant queering of identity, such as moments where seemingly modernist tropes give way to campy decorative impulses. I'm using this practice to exalt spaces between categories and to engage with flux and contradiction over elucidation. They're intended to exist as unresolved or partially resolved tensions of disparate elements that are continuously in flux. And this is my last series of 3 paintings that I approach as books of days, or a book of days. And I'm going to show 3 of these before I close. So I'm using the Tree of Life glyph for these. What are these? I didn't even put the measurements. They're about 24 by 32, I believe. So they're a little bit larger than the last series. And I use the Tree of Life glyph as an invisible armature. And then I map the paths and points and colors based on the numerology of the day. So it was the month, the day, and the year, and then the total value of those numbers to create a 4th point. And this really felt relevant to, you know, being in quarantine and sort of just taking in one day at a time and kind of seeing what it has to offer, what kinds of things were going to come up that day, and really being just paying attention to sort of whatever was present. So so that was kind of part of the idea behind just kind of dealing with the numbers assigned to the day as I'm painting. So each of the numbers are corresponding with a point or path on the tree, and then the dot pattern that you see here is carried over from a previous piece. So carrying the DNA from the last painting that I did or project that I did. And then the undertone colors that you can see very lightly on the right are pink and blue washes. And that's kind of it is a gesture to active and passive energy. Up in the upper right corner, it's a poured crust of gesso, and then the bottom left black shape is black glitter, very fine black glitter. The colored points and paths are determining the placement and the color of the shape, as well as these rhythmic patterns that course through the surfaces here. And again, you can see with some of these, there's shiny foil, colored foil coming through the holes. And this is my last image I'm going to show you. Pattern seeking enables me to bore beneath the turbulence of world events to aspects of existence that have a timelessness. By adapting arcane traditions in the present, my work participates in a lineage of mapping and collaborating with ontological mysteries. I wish to perpetuate an alchemical worldview that restores harmony by transmuting dualities and embraces interdependence towards an exalted state of being. I'm going to close with this quote by British Columbia-based artist, scholar Denise Ferreira da Silva from her essay, On Difference Without Separability. What if, instead of the ordered world, we could imagine the world as plenum, an infinite composition in which each existence singularity is contingent upon its becoming one possible expression of all other existence, with which it is entangled beyond space and time. Thank you all for coming.
Can we all unmute and give Laurel a hand? Thank you, Laurel. If you have a question for Laurel, please put it in the chat or use the raise hand function. Let's see, Deborah.
Deb.
Deborah.
Oh, you're muted.
Now I'm not, right?
Okay, yeah, you're good. Hi.
I'm saying thank you so much for a terrific talk. It's so thoughtful and the work is beautiful. And I totally respond to the need to make order out of, everything that surrounds us. And I think this is, you have a really terrific way of doing that. And I have two things, not really questions. Well, one question, which is, are you interested or inspired by Saul LeWitt, who also, for whom systems are really important to like make something? I mean, you're in a very different kind of location than he was. I'm just curious if that, and the other thing is, I have read a fabulous book, which I think you would like, which is called Science of the Magical by Matt Kaplan. And it's a really fun read, and I think you would, it would be interesting for you to do so.
Oh, I love that title. Thank you. Yes, please pass that on to me or drop it in the chat, and I'll look into that. It's ironic that the Saul LeWitt, you'd think that he'd be such a sort of close. And I definitely relate to something really feel departs from that in so many ways, and I really haven't spent a lot of time sort of delving, kind of set my sights to artists that are less in the canonical conversation as kindreds, but in so many ways, like there's such an obvious connection there. Yeah.
Or maybe you're sort of an antidote to his, his energy anyway.
Yeah. It's like a parallel universe or something. Yeah, or flip side or another option.
It was really a pleasure to see how you think, and then the result of all that thinking and the numbers and so on are these just really interesting paintings. So thank you.
There's
you,
a
Deb.
question from Peter.
Hey, Laurel, thanks for that. So amazing. Yeah, I mean, this is Deb kind of, took the first part of my thought here, although we could share it. We can share these thoughts. But yeah, I mean, of course, I thought of Soloist, but I, of course, also thought of Mondrian and, de Stijl and this sort of language of harmonizing antimonies in some way, these sort of polar oppositions that gain some kind of, productive tension through a language of abstraction. And I was wondering, because I think about this very frequently, about the kind of, materialist reading of abstraction and this other strain which follows an esoteric tradition, and how you navigate these various figures, So Mondrian, I mean, I just think of all the time, because of course he gets cited within all of these kind of materialist advocacies for abstractions, kind of utopian branch, And then Soloist, of course, such a darling for conceptual artists, but they can definitely be read mystically very easily. So I wonder if you can kind of talk about
in Mondrian.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so much of the early modernist practices relationship to mysticism was written out of discourse and dismissed quite a bit, but Mondrian was a theosophist, and he was really determined to make a visual expression of the equilibrium that's part of these hermetic principles. And so I think a lot of Mondrian's kind of insistence on finding that perfect equilibrium and sort of adjusting the elements to really just find that sweet spot of everything, all of the sort of colors and shapes sort of resting at this non-hierarchical state. And something that I'm kind of like communicating with is more of an insistence on we never get there. It's always in flux, and so I'm kind of bringing in the flaw and the glitch and the kind of aspiration towards that equilibrium at the same time as really working with ways in which it breaks down and its impossibility. So I'm very much thinking about artists like Mondrian in particular, and these topics, they course through up until the minimalist period too, and wait, what did you say, Peter?
No, I mean, I'm agreeing enthusiastically because I mean that that's kind of like to misappropriate Foster's term, that's kind of like the crux of minimalism. Is abstraction a mystical portal, or is it a material thing, right? And hence the battle for Stella, and battle lines are being drawn.
Absolutely, and again, so much of the mystical conversation again was dismissed, but if you go to the artists themselves, like that was such a huge part of their mission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So we have questions from Brenda and then one from Jan.
Yeah, hi. I wrote it out, so I'm just going to read it. My question was, do you often show your process when you exhibit? Do you write about it in your artist statements? How important is it for you that your audience or your viewers know about the entire process behind your work?
Great question. Who asked that? I can't see you.
That's Brenda.
Brenda, thank you for that question. No, I don't feel like my process actually needs to be part of the experience of the work. It's really something that only comes up in artist talks, and aspects of it definitely are in, say, writing or press releases about my work, but it's really something that I think of as the engine and not necessarily something that people need in order to access the experience that I'm putting out there, or a possible experience that I'm putting out there. So yeah, and especially because my interests are really nerdy and not for everyone, and are incredibly complex. I just don't feel like that's something that people need to get into or decode in any way in order to have a kind of direct relationship with the work. So in a way, I'm really hesitant to talk about all that goes into it, because I don't want that to kind of get in the way of whatever a viewer brings to the work. So essentially, if you want to know more, come to one of my artist talks. But yeah, the writing, I usually leave it fairly open, and I'm really interested in like the co-authorship. I don't even know if that's the right word. The sort of co-created experience between the objects and the viewers, and the conversations that happen around that. It's supposed to be very experiential rather than cerebral.
So we have a question from Jan, and then from Will Clem.
Hi, Laurel. Can you see
Hi,
me?
Jan.
I can see
Yeah.
you. Okay.
Yeah, I can see you.
I can see like
Nice to
six
see you.
people at the top of the screen. I always wonder, like why those 6 people. But anyway, so fascinating to see the new bodies of work, and just to see how much progress you're making in your practice and how much resiliency there is there. Okay, that observation. But you know a lot about numerical systems, way more than I do. And I was just wondering, in your opinion, if they aim to describe completeness, like conclusions to be reached, like unity. I understand in your work that you're interrupting the logic with the random effects, but could you comment on that? Do you think that like the Kabbalah tree of life aims in some sense for completeness?
It does, and absolutely, that's something that I'm talking about, is the sort of like towards a totality, towards a kind of equilibrating interdependence, but also this recognition of that being something that we can only work towards and not fully arrive at. And even in Kabbalah, once you arrive to whatever version of that you then start over. So it's constantly spitting you out, and you have to start over. And that's sort of the way that the path work is set up. So yeah, totality and wholeness. A wholeness that's,
I'm just wondering, where do we apply that? Do we apply that to our personal quest to know ourselves or to be one with the world, however we define that? Because it seems like on a global stage, this gesture, these desires for totalization are really the mark of colonialism and imperialism. And so, like in our seminar, we're reading a text by Okwuean Weezer, The Black Box. And he's so eloquent on this idea of breaking up those systems of dominance that have prescribed completeness and totalization. That's kind of why I asked, like, what level do you think, the Kabbalah doesn't work on a political global level. So where is it applicable, except in some fantasy of unity?
Yeah, well, I think that what you're talking about relates to the Denise Ferreira da Silva quote at the end, and actually does apply to Kabbalah, is that it's supposed to be about like things not being homogenized under one umbrella, but actually things being really different and dynamic from each other in a way that I think global capitalism is about a certain kind of homogenization, and that it actually does apply to something that I think capitalism got wrong, and that is that their difference equals a separation, and instead of difference as being crucial to the vitality of the totality, the even function of a totality, is that differences be differences, and that they sort of offer something that the other aspects can't or don't, and so that those things that differences are essential to a totality. And so in a way, I would say the Kabbalah is actually very applicable politically in that way. And I think that the capitalist agenda got that idea of totality completely wrong, that it's actually working against that vision.
As every other agenda has as well. I mean, many of their politics perhaps is antithetical to that logic you just described. Well, okay, great. Thank you so much.
I actually had a follow-up question to what Jan just said. I know there's Will and Evan and Holly have questions, but cycling back to capitalism, which often reduces our value to the numeric, like what is your zip code, what is your net worth, what is your sort of height, weight, productivity, and maybe even thinking back to like Greek numeric worship, where the numbers are immortal and they're irrefutable and they're kind of weaponized against paganism. And then I guess the perfect number, because there is a kind of ideal of perfection, though there is a kind of acceptance of the unknown and the kind of divination, but it provides a set of tensions. And I was hoping you could address that because, in raw capitalism, the numerics often are so oppressive and so dehumanizing. And so how does one, and maybe there are separate equations that just happen to use numbers as an overlap, but I was wondering some of your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have, I guess, sort of a simple response that, things that have great virtues have the opposite. They can be driven to a sort of perverse iteration of themselves. And I would say that whatever the sort of exaltation of numbers, the sort of exalted state of numbers can go so far as to become an affliction. And that's where I think that what you're talking about sort of the role of numbers, say, I actually don't know about that Greek weaponizing of numbers against paganism. I'd be curious about talking about that, but I think in terms of what you're saying about global capitalism, that's a state of affliction, of something that in another context has quite the opposite energy to it.
But it seems to be the central sort of space of worship, in societies, like getting the numbers right.
Well, I guess, and they're not connected to anything else, I guess, that it's like, true. Yeah, it's become myopic.
Well, I'm going to send this over to Will as a question, and then Evan.
Yeah, you can hear me, right? Good.
Yeah, well, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, great.
I think you kind of answered my question, kind of in between the information you were giving, kind of, I think what you meant, but I'm into psychomagic and summa and stuff like that. So I was wondering, when you're approaching esoteric subjects like numerology and sort of Solomon-esque type ideals, how do you balance your own personal aesthetics with the systems and the governing rules behind those things? Because I know from experience you can begin with those rules and foundations, but if you follow them all the way through, sometimes you mix, like, it doesn't seem there's an out of balance or a rebalance, or it's too balanced. I was wondering how you kind of make decisions on when you divert from the esoteric information back into the aesthetics. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. There was a point where you broke up, so forgive me.
Oh, Laurel, you froze for a moment. So can you say that again?
As I described before, it's the prompt. Can you hear me?
No, can you repeat that? You're frozen.
Everyone's frozen. Okay, I think maybe you're back. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You're back.
You're back.
Okay. All right. Should I turn off my camera? Do you think
Yeah, that might help, or make your window smaller.
make my window smaller? It's pretty small, but I'll try it.
Working now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sort of staying really faithful to, to like sort of strict with the esoteric systems. As I described before, it's an engine, and it's something that very quickly morphs into my own kind of vocabulary. That's why most people would never know that, there's all this kind of esoteric research and practice behind what I'm doing. So definitely, like I'm taking the material and I'm translating it into my own language. And another thing is sort of I follow systems till they, like, I'm actually following them until they break down, because when they break down is when I get to make like these sort of decisions that sort of jettison all of the sort of principles in place. So I'm actually using them so that I can find that rupture or that breakdown or that sort of place where where the system collapses and I get spat out, and I have to like come up with and it's sort of this chaos moment where I have to kind of come up with a way to like redirect it, right? And this is again why I work in series, is because they always morph into something new. But yeah, it's very much, I'm very much about like translating it into a vocabulary that I feel like is sort of coming from like my own temperament. I hope that answers your question, Will.
Yeah, thank you very much. I wanted to get like a clarification on it because I was really interested. You kind of answered it a bunch, I think, but thank you.
There's a question from Evan and then Holly.
Evan, my friend.
Hey,
Hi.
congrats on your internet staying totally cool the whole talk and then bombing afterwards. So like the universe is clearly like offering you a gift. So congratulations. I just wanted to know if like queer pagan practices, like queer sigilization, if like any of that makes its way into your work. I mean, you and I haven't done a studio visit in a number of years. I'm so just like mind boggled by this new body of work. It's just like so spectacular and like a really beautiful and very natural extension from the previous work. So just amazing. But just curious about that, like the sigil aspect of your work.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I'm really familiar with artists who work with that, and it's not something that's specific in my, or like a specific focus in my work.
Oh, you froze again, Laurel.
Things that have like certain kind of canonical relationship, like campy excess, in these sort of moments, and to me that's that is the kind of way that I'm bringing a kind of queer magic sensibility into it. But yeah, the sigilization specifically, depending on what I'm working with sort of intentionally, may or may not intersect with those practices, but it's definitely something that's like let's just say a relative, but not a direct intention.
Right, like a distant cousin of Aleister Crowley,
Right.
Exactly. If,
Although
if
he
Aleister
wasn't,
Crowley was like really into numbers.
and you know, very valuable in the lineage that I'm.
Oh, Laurel, could you repeat that? We lost that last response.
About Crowley?
Yeah.
Oh, I just said that he's a scoundrel, but it is significant to the lineage that I researched. Did you hear that?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. There's a question from Holly.
Hey, Laurel.
Hi, Holly. So nice to see you.
So good to see you too. Happy residency.
Thank you.
I am so interested in ritual practice and sort of the necessities for ritual practice. And one of the necessities I find is surrender. And the number system seems like a really convenient space to sort of engineer surrender. And I was just wondering if that is has to do with why the number systems.
Probably not consciously, but definitely, you know, if we were like to sit on.
Oh no, you froze.
There's a certain to release my subjectivity and kind of follow and see where it takes me. Can you guys hear me?
I missed the first part, but I got the second.
Yeah, and we can hear you now that you've turned off the camera.
Okay. Yeah. What did I finish with, Holly?
That the number systems maybe help release a subjectivity.
Yeah. So there is a way where the number, working with the number systems allows me to get out of my own way and sort of like follow wherever they take me, whether I like it or not, kind of thing. And so there is a way where I'm not sort of acting upon the thing anymore through these kinds of systems, where I'm actually letting it show me something that I don't know. And so there is a real surrendering to that, for sure. And I'm sure there's more layers to that sort of.
Any other questions for Laurel? I guess I have one just to sort of conclude, which is I'm kind of amazed, and we talk about this a lot in terms of, when we do crits with students about the difference between, why we made the work or the process or how we think about that versus what the work is doing out in the world. And seeing your last couple shows at Kate Werble, I'm just amazed by the sort of felt space of the work, or the kind of atmosphere, quality, the psychology of the work. And so can you address that a little bit about how you respond to what the work does after you put in this very rigorous process and research to produce the work?
I have a really simple answer to that. I set it free. You know what I mean? Like it's like all of that, the rigor to how I arrive and make these things, like that happens. It's like it becomes basically a vessel of resonances for me. And then it's like, it goes free, and whatever kinds of experiences people have with the work, and that's essentially where I'm at about that it's all about like unpacking it with the kind of intensiveness that I've presented here, but then after that I don't sort of attach myself to how it reads, because I feel like it should evolve in context just like everything else.
Fantastic, and that's a great place to conclude. Can we all unmute again and give Laurel a round of applause? Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Sorry about my video breaking up.
Oh, no worries. That was a fantastic talk. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow for Evan's talk.